Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our candidate forum for the contested seats for Minnesota Supreme Court and Court of Appeals. All candidates were invited, but 2 of the candidates did not respond to the League's emails and certified mail. The candidates are seated by office and then in alphabetical order, and they are for Supreme Court Chief Justice Natalie Hudson, for Supreme Court Associate Justice 6, Matthew Hansen, and Carl Procaccini, and for the Court of Appeals, Judge 12, Diane Bradfold. They will take turns being first to answer the questions. The forum format begins with the candidates responding to the questions sent to them earlier by the League of Women Voters Golden Valley. That will be followed by questions submitted by the in-person audience and that were also sent to the League of Women Voters Golden Valley email. Finally, there will be a 1-minute closing statement. We ask that there be no demonstrations in support or opposition to the candidates or their positions, and that the candidates be allowed to finish, allowed their full time to get their points across. The choice of questions will be made by me are in good faith efforts to reflect the interests expressed by those submitted questions. If your question is not addressed here tonight, please contact the candidate directly after the forum. We have timekeepers so that each candidate has the same amount of time to respond to the questions. The timekeeper will hold up a card when there are 15 seconds left and a stop card when your time is up. We ask that you finish your sentence and stop at that point. The opening question is, why are you running for office and what are your qualifications? And you will have 2 minutes to respond to this question. The first candidate will be candidate Hudson.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. Again, my name is Natalie Hudson and I am the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. I'm delighted to be here. I do want to thank the League for hosting this forum. This is one of the most important ways that the citizens of Minnesota can learn about judicial candidates, and I thank the League for conducting these forums over many, many years. I am a 1982 graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School, and so I've been practicing law for over 40 years. My practice, when I first came out of law school, was primarily in the public sector, but for the last almost quarter century, I've been a judge. I spent 13 years on the Court of Appeals as a judge there, and for the last 9 years, I've been an associate on the Minnesota Supreme Court. And this last year, since October of 2023, I have been the Chief Justice. Governor Walz elevated me to that position upon the retirement of Lori Gilday. I firmly believe, and as you've heard, the Supreme Court is the court of last resort, and I firmly believe that that is something that the citizens of Minnesota should keep in mind, because once we issue an opinion, it is the opinion of the state, regardless of what the lower courts might have ruled. And for that reason, it's important that we uphold, and we do uphold, the rule of law in Minnesota. I also want to convey to the people of Minnesota that I've long been a believer in the fact that justice is not simply a result. Justice is a process. And part of my role as the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, and part of the role of our court, is to make sure that not only do we reach the right result, but we get there through the right processes, that we're fair to all the people that come before us, that the rule of law is applied evenly, so that there is public trust and confidence in what we do, because the opinions we issue as the court of last resort will stand the test of time, hopefully, and be the law in Minnesota for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to make that opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And candidate Hansen.
Good evening. My name is Matthew R. Hansen, and I am a candidate for Minnesota Supreme Court, Seat 6. I'm a 5th generation, born and raised Minnesotan. I grew up in a small township south of the Twin Cities. I graduated from Concordia University in St. Paul, and then went on to graduate from Mitchell Hamlin, formerly known as William Mitchell, right here in Minnesota. Throughout my working career, I've had the opportunity to work at some of Minnesota's best companies, including Dairy Queen, Cambria, and in the position as an attorney, Thomson Reuters and Securian Financial. While at Securian Financial, I actually met my wife, Amy, and Amy and I just this last week welcomed our first child into the world. So as all you parents listening or in the audience can probably understand, I'm a little tired tonight, but I'm very happy to be here. I am running in this election for one simple reason: to give Minnesotans a choice in their judicial elections. As attorneys, we all swear an oath to support the Minnesota and the U.S. Constitution. In Minnesota, we elect our judges. Article 6, Section 7 of the Minnesota Constitution dictates that judges shall be elected. Unfortunately, it has become common practice among members of the judiciary to retire mid-term in order to allow the governor to appoint his favored candidate. When judges run unopposed in judicial elections, the people are no longer able to exercise their authority to elect a judge of their choice. I chose to run in this election to honor my oath and support the Minnesota Constitution by giving Minnesotans a choice in this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen and Candidate Procaccini.
Hi, everybody, and I'm Carl Procaccini, and I'm an Associate Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. And Governor Walz appointed me to fill the seat vacated when Chief Justice Hudson was elevated to her position. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Minnesota State Bar Association for holding this forum and helping educate voters on these important races. These are races that sometimes go unnoticed, and so I'm grateful for the folks in the audience and the folks watching online. I'm running to retain my seat on the Supreme Court because I want to continue to serve the people of Minnesota. Our court hears cases that are important to the parties in front of us, but also to everybody in Minnesota. Our job is to make decisions and write opinions that show that we've listened to both sides and we've made a reasoned and justified decision. And almost by definition, every decision that we write, one party's not happy with. But if we do our job well and we explain our reasons well, we hope that both parties walk away feeling that they've been listened to and respected in that process of rendering a decision. You've asked about my qualifications, and in my time on the Minnesota Supreme Court, I think I've proven myself to be hardworking, fair, and impartial. And before I joined the court, I spent my entire legal career here in Minnesota working in private practice, public service, and teaching law. I started my career working for two trailblazing federal judges, Judges Diana Murphy and Michael Davis. I then worked in a private law firm where I devoted hundreds of hours to representing people who could not afford a lawyer. I then went into public service, and I served for 4.5 years as the governor's general counsel, where we worked on some of the most difficult challenges facing our state. I've also worked as a law professor throughout my career. I've been a professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, in addition to William Mitchell College of Law. And I think that all my professional experience has prepared me well for this role and to work hard for the people of Minnesota. I'm really proud to have earned the support of 9 former justices, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you, and I'd be grateful for your vote.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini. Candidate Bratfold, please.
Good evening. I'm Diane Bratfold, and I want to thank everyone here tonight for caring as much as you do about judicial elections. My thanks, too, to the Bar Association and to the League for hosting this forum. So I'm here tonight to ask you to vote for me on November 5th. I would like to be reelected to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. I love being an appellate judge. It is absolutely the greatest honor in my life. I spent almost 30 years in private practice before going on the bench. I have now been a bench in both Hennepin County as well as on the Minnesota Court of Appeals, Hennepin County for 2 years and the Minnesota Court of Appeals for 8 years. I was elected to this seat in 2018, and I'm asking to be reelected this time. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Minnesota Court of Appeals. We hear and decide 2,200 appeals every year. And as was mentioned by the moderator, we do that and issue a written decision with written reasons for our decision in about 90 days after that appeal is heard. So we hear and do justice for a lot of people, and every one of those cases is very important, and I never forget that there are real people behind every one of those cases. Each of them deserves a chance for justice, and our court is the final decision maker in most of those cases. It's about 95% of all of those cases end in the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So what kind of judges do we need to decide those cases? We need experienced judges. Judges like me, there are other types of judges, but I'm a good one, who work hard, who have experience as judges. I've been a judge now for almost 10 years, and who have also practiced the law in the state of Minnesota, as I have done, listening to clients, collaborating with other attorneys, hearing judges, getting to know all of the partners that are involved in our civil and criminal justice system. So the experience that I offer, I think, is exactly what Minnesota needs on the Minnesota Court of Appeals in order for us to do justice in every one of those cases. So that's the main reason I ask for your support, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk the rest of the night, and I appreciate this chance to do so.
Thank you, Candidate Brandvold. All right, now we will move to questions from the audience. Candidates will have up to 1 and 1.5 minutes to answer these questions. The order of response will rotate for each question so that each candidate will get an opportunity to be the first to respond. We will begin our first question with Candidate Brandvold. And the question is, what are the most pressing community issues related to the courts and law enforcement?
It's hard to answer that question in 1 minute, but I'll give it a try. I think from the perspective of the Minnesota Court of Appeals, the most pressing issue, community issue, is to make sure that justice is done in every case, that a reasoned decision is given, and a panel of 3 judges hears that case on the merits. But we also want to make sure that everyone has access to appellate justice in Minnesota. Providing access to appellate justice is in part keeping our doors open and making it easy for everyone to understand how to get that right of appeal. We've tried to do that in Minnesota in many different ways, one of which is providing information on our website so that someone could file their own appeal and pursue it on their own, but also to make legal services available for individuals. Now, we don't do it perfectly. If we did it perfectly, then it wouldn't be a pressing issue. It's a pressing issue because we need to keep working at it, providing more access to appellate justice for everyone in Minnesota. One of the ways my court works with lawyers and other judges to do that is to try to find volunteers to represent people who cannot represent themselves. As well, the state of Minnesota and other organizations provide free legal services or legal services on a scale basis for individuals who can't afford it. So that's what I see as the most pressing issue, at least in 1 minute. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Candidate Brandvold. And Candidate Procaccini, please.
Well, thanks very much, and it's quite a broad question, and so I'll do my best in 1.5 minutes. So first, to start, I think, and to pick up on where Judge Brandvold may have left off there, is access to justice means that folks can have good representation in court, and there are lots of ways for us to get at that issue. I think the private bar has a role to play. The private lawyers in Minnesota have ethical responsibilities to provide pro bono representation, free representation to people who can't afford it, and that's written into our ethical rules, 50 hours a year of free legal services. And during my time in private practice, I averaged over 100 hours a year in free legal services for people who couldn't afford them. That's an important commitment that we make as professionals. And as a Supreme Court Justice, we have the opportunity to talk to law students and new admittees every week. And every time I do, I try to impress on them the importance of doing that pro bono work to help their fellow Minnesotans get the representation they need in court. I don't think pro bono is the only solution, and we need to continue to invest in civil legal aid, and Minnesota is a leader in doing that in our communities around the state. And I also think There's a role for creativity here, and I'm excited as a justice to be involved in our efforts to use new technology in new ways, and in particular I'm excited about the promise of artificial intelligence and our ability to get that technology in the hands of people who can't otherwise afford a lawyer.
Thank you. Candidate Hudson, please.
Thank you. I would echo what my colleagues have said, at least in one respect, in terms of the access to justice issue. There couldn't be a more fundamental issue that faces our courts right now. One of the things that the judicial branch has done recently is move to the use of remote technology, remote hearings, so that not all of our hearings are now in person. Many of those are done remotely, so that people who may not have access to the courthouse or who may live miles from the courthouse can still work with their attorney remotely and can come to certain hearings remotely. Not every hearing is remote, some are still in person, but that has proved to be a tremendous asset to expanding access. So if you live in greater Minnesota, where you might be 50 miles from a courthouse or 50 miles from the nearest legal aid attorney, if that's the need that you have, and many individuals in our state do, you can connect with your attorney remotely and you can attend that hearing remotely. And so that move to more remote hearings has expanded our ability as a court system to make sure that everyone has access to the legal system and not just those who can afford it. The other thing I would say, though, is we see a mental health crisis in our court system, and we've started a mental health justice initiative to better and more humanely deal with individuals who are suffering with mental illness in our justice system. And the last thing that I would say, and I see this more as chief, because my role as chief is more administrative, we need to do more and are doing more to begin to raise juror per diems so that we can expand diversity amongst our juries and expand access to money for interpreters in our court system. Thank you.
Thank you. And Candidate Hansen, please.
When I speak to a lot of voters about, pressing community issues for both the courts and law enforcement, one common theme I hear a lot, and that it may just be a perception or it may be lived, that a lot of people don't feel, whether they're on law enforcement, that they have the back of county attorneys or judges for some cases that have gone national attention for some things. And that is a perception that's really hard to beat, because a lot of times, and you'll see it in court, whether it's attorneys or the current judges here, as the only non-current judge, it's easier to be critical, kind of sitting from the outside. But courts have to do a lot. I mean, they're not only, defending the rights of the presumed innocent defendant, but also they have a role in protecting the victims of the crimes. And I do think law enforcement, at least, again, when I talk to people throughout the state, they feel that they're kind of left to dry. I believe the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis is still abandoned. So that's the number one issue I hear, is that all the judges are with one political party, and that party may not be serious on crime. Now, that might just be a perception. I don't think anyone up here would go easy on criminals or anything like that, but the community issues is something that I think the court can generally improve on, and that's being responsive.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. And we will start with you for this next question. The question is, what role do your courts have in running the court and legal system, and what experience do you have in this area?
My courts?
That's what the question says. Yep.
Well, for the seat I'm running for, the Supreme Court, they are in charge. The Constitution is quite clear that it's the Supreme Court that is really responsible for the entire judicial branch. So one way they can do better would be to listen to people, to increase judicial economy and efficiency, and really be more responsive to people. And frankly, what we're doing here even tonight, as the only challenger, I feel a little bit on the spot, but it's really getting out in front of people, even if you don't have a challenger. and talking to them and getting questions asked directly. I think that helps really more than anything.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. And Candidate Hudson, please.
Well, as the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, my principal job is as an administrator. I, of course, still carry a caseload, as my colleagues do on the court, but I'm responsible as the head of the third branch of government, of the judicial branch. And so part of that involves making sure that the branch is properly funded. And so I spend a lot of my time looking and ensuring that the branch gets the proper funding it needs from the legislature. So a lot of my time is spent at the legislature. I would say to the questioner here, just a reminder that the branch is a complex organization. The branch consists of over 2,500 employees. There are almost 322 judges that serve the judicial branch. We have an $866 million budget. And so much of the responsibility of the chief is ensuring that the branch has the funds it needs to run properly. And kind of backtracking a little bit on the previous question, one of the things we're looking at doing, for instance, we recognize that the juror per diem right now is $20. It's difficult to come and serve on a jury and to get a diverse jury, which is a constitutional right under the Sixth Amendment, that you be judged by a jury of your peers. If you're all that you can afford to allot is $20 a month. And so one of the initiatives that we will be looking to the legislature for this session is to increase that juror per diem to $100. And so it's initiatives like that that are the responsibility of the Chief Justice. And I will say it's not a role that just anyone can step into. I've been an appellate judge for almost 20 years and chief for the last year. That kind of experience is important to the people of Minnesota to make sure that the administrative responsibilities that go with being chief are being carried out.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Candidate Bradfold, please.
My court, as we've already talked about, is the court that receives most of the appeals in the state of Minnesota. The Supreme Court has a slightly different role in that they oversee all of our cases and grant review when they deem it appropriate. But we are the final decision maker in most of those cases. So what do we need to do in order to be effective in the legal system? I think the most important thing we do is writing a reasonable and understandable opinion in every one of those cases. And by understandable, I mean to everyone. Of course, it should speak to the winner and the loser in that appeal, most importantly, to the party that loses, to explain the reasons for the court's decision, because it is probably the last decision that person is going to read in that case. The second thing we need to do is make those opinions available to everyone. So available on our website, available to the public, and to have all proceedings done in public so that you can see our process. Now, we do all of those things. In addition, we also take comments. So we make an effort to do outreach with the district court judges, with lawyers, with the public in general, to make our role known, as well as to receive feedback. So for instance, if we haven't if we haven't written an opinion on a particular issue for a while, to make sure that we do that the next time we have an opportunity, or to change our procedures. So those are all things that my court attempts to do in order to improve the judicial system and to do its work well.
Thank you, Candidate Bradfold. And Candidate Procaccini.
Yeah, and so in my role as a Supreme Court Justice and an Associate Justice is really to support the Chief Justice in her administrative role, and the Chief Justice delegates administrative assignments to each of us Associate Justices on the court, and that's a responsibility that we all take really seriously. So just to give you a sense of the sort of administrative work that I do on a daily basis, I serve as our court's liaison to the Board of Law Examiners. That's the board that decides admission criteria for people who are joining the bar in the state of Minnesota. And this is critically important work because we want to make sure the public is protected and that the people who are holding themselves out as attorneys in Minnesota are qualified and competent to do that job well for all Minnesotans. And so that's a job that I take really seriously, and I spend hours working with the board and learning more about the developments in the law, in the bar exam and law admissions in our state. We also serve on rules committees where the Supreme Court promulgates rules, writes rules that govern lawyers and courts around the state. And those rules need to evolve with the times, and they need to adapt to new statutes and new changes in the law. And so we're constantly revising and rewriting those rules to make sure that our courts operate efficiently. And we also serve as liaisons to districts around the state. And I serve as the liaison to the 2nd and the 6th District. The 2nd District is right down the road in Ramsey County, and the 6th District is the Iron Range in Duluth. And I was in St. Paul today meeting with the 2nd Circuit, and up in Saginaw last week meeting with the 6th, and that's a really important responsibility that we take on as justices.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini, and we'll start with you with this next question. The question is, some people argue that the U.S. Supreme Court is ideologically driven. What can we do as a society, and what will you do as a judge or justice to address the concerns that the courts have become polarized?
Well, the number one thing that all of us as judges can do is make sure that we are approaching every case with a fair and impartial eye, and that we all are taking our oaths seriously. We all swear an oath to the Constitution and to the laws of the U.S. The U.S. Constitution, the Minnesota Constitution, and the laws of the state of Minnesota. And that is a responsibility that we need to take seriously. And I do. And I think there are important distinctions between the federal judiciary and ours, and I'd start with the fact that for many years now, Minnesota judges and justices, whether we're on the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, or the District Court, are all subject to the same code of judicial conduct. We have an independent enforcement body here in Minnesota that enforces the rules that we all abide by, and I think that Minnesotans really should take pride in that system and should be comforted by the fact that we do have a code of ethics that governs all of us. When we swear that oath, we put aside whatever partisan interests we might have, whatever personal interests we might have, and we swear to uphold the law fairly to everybody who comes in our courts. And even in the conduct of these elections, our judicial elections are really different from partisan elections. We're not out there campaigning with parties. We are nonpartisan candidates who abide by our code of ethics even as we are on the campaign trail working to earn your votes.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini. And Candidate Brantvold, please.
I think it's fair to say that the Minnesota state, whether district or appellate courts, are not polarized, and certainly not in the same way that the federal courts are at least perceived to be. I won't say anything more about the federal courts, but as far as the state courts are concerned, in all of the ways that Justice Procaccini just mentioned, the judges in Minnesota have carefully maintained their independence. We do have nonpartisan races. We take great effort and have a lot of assistance in making sure that we separate ourselves both from our prior practice of law. We no longer represent individuals. I heard one judge explain it this way. In my own practice, I spent about 26 years representing clients and advocating for them. I no longer advocate for clients. I advocate for justice, and I advocate for the law in the state of Minnesota. And it's that kind of independence from politics, independence from financial commitments that makes sure that Minnesota has a fair and impartial judiciary that is not polarized.
Thank you, Candidate Brantvold. Candidate Hansen, please.
One of the reasons why I do want to run and be a Minnesota Supreme Court justice is to prevent the ideology-driven perception that the court currently has. I believe, and I could be fact-checked on this, but at any level in this state, whether it's the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, or district courts, over 98% have been appointed by the last two governors. And anytime you have one political party being responsible for the appointment of judges, it's going to lean one way. Now, luckily in Minnesota, we do have judicial elections. And one way that we can help, let's assume it's a rumor, and this is a complete independent judiciary, one way that we can dispel that is what we're doing here, and allowing the people in whom all political power is inherent to question their judges and to get their views on things and to know where they stand on issues. So by having elections and contested elections, even though they may not be fun for those being challenged, but it is a way that the people can get involved and know more about their judges. So we don't end up with polarizing issues that really only serve to antagonize one base or the other and be more even-handed.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. And Candidate Hudson, please.
One of the hallmarks of the Minnesota judiciary is that we are nonpartisan. And to a person, all the judges that I know, and certainly for myself, have never gotten involved in partisan politics. We don't accept big money donations from a particular party, and there's a reason for that, so that we can maintain our neutrality. Minnesota has for years been able to stay above the fray from states like Texas and Wisconsin, which have been just overly inundated with big money, millions and millions of dollars. And you don't see that in our judicial races here in Minnesota, and that's because we strive so hard to remain nonpartisan. Thurgood Marshall gave a speech many years ago about the sword versus the robe, and what he meant by that is something that Judge Bratfold touched on. You know, as advocates, you have the sword. As an attorney, you are advocating for a client for a particular position, but once you decide to put on that robe, or you're so privileged to be able to wear that robe, what you do is, as Justice Procaccini said, you swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Minnesota to remain neutral, to apply the rule of law as you understand it, as best you understand it, to the facts that are before you, which is why we don't take positions. We don't campaign in the way that traditional candidates do. You don't want us to do that. You don't want us to take a position on particular points of issues. You want us to decide those when they come before us. And we take that very seriously as judges. And the last thing I would say, if any judge ever tells you they've never written an opinion that they don't agree with, they're lying. I've written many opinions that I personally do not agree with, but I wrote them because I was applying the rule of law.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Just a reminder to keep track of the time when that stop sign comes up. And Candidate Hudson, we'll start with you for this next question. How would you handle a situation where your personal beliefs conflict with established law or legal precedent?
Well, that's where I left off. So that's a perfect question. If any judge ever tells you that they have never written an opinion which they personally don't agree with, they are lying to you, because as a judge, you will come across many issues that you have maybe even strong personal views regarding them. But it goes back to the oath that we take, and judges take that oath seriously. And fortunately, in an appellate body like ours, you have other justices to bounce those issues off of, and to talk through the law, and to pull you back if for some reason you start inching towards what the law clearly says you need to do otherwise. And so that respect for the law, and respect for the rule of law, and respect for precedent, and respect for stare decisis, which is simply the principle that we follow the law that has come down through the ages, barring some distinguishing factors that suggest that we do otherwise. That is something that is deeply ingrained and in all of us, and certainly as chief, that is a role I take even more seriously, that I lead my court in making sure that we are always abiding by the rule of law, regardless of what our personal views may be. Is that difficult to do sometimes? Yes, it is. But if you can't do that, then you shouldn't wear the robe.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Candidate Hansen, please.
It's easy to assume if someone personally thinks some way that they'll act that similar way when it comes to the law. However, as lawyers and judges on this panel, it's also easy to bifurcate those two things. When I worked as a reference attorney with Thomson Reuters, one of the most fun and challenging thing to do is research the law. I may have an opinion on something like, well, I think it should be A, B, C, But you can research past judicial opinions, the written law from the legislature, and if it contradicts you, well, the decision's easy. The law is the law, and you should apply it as it's written. And I think the good thing about having 7 distinct members on the Minnesota Supreme Court is that you have some room for personal, maybe hidden bias, but at the end of the day, the other members can even come together and hopefully make a unanimous opinion that supports the law, regardless of how you feel personally on an issue.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. Candidate Bradfold, please.
So let me just continue a bit to talk about what the oath of office means. For a judge, it means that I will set aside my personal opinions and personal beliefs, and instead that I will uphold and apply the law. And of course, we have a hierarchy of law in Minnesota. So the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the Minnesota State Constitution, and then the laws that are passed by the legislature. I'm very aware that I am involved in just one of the 3 branches of government, but it's an important branch. It's the branch that interprets and applies the law. It is not the branch that interprets and applies what Diane Bradfold thinks. It's not what you've asked me to do. It is not what I do. And that's why I stand by my oath of office, and I will set aside my personal opinion and instead apply the law.
Thank you, Candidate Bradfold. Candidate Procaccini, please.
Well, to me, this question is really it's the job. It's the whole job. And as a lawyer, you learn to represent clients who have positions that may be different from your own personal preferences, and you learn to zealously advocate for those clients in that situation. And as a judge, as I've learned, your client, maybe you say your client is justice, or you think of your client as the rule of law itself. That basic principle that nobody's above the law, nobody's below the law, and that our role is to interpret and apply the role faithfully to make sure that everybody has a fair shake in court is the job. And so really, there are cases where personally I might have picked made a different decision if I had been in the legislature or the executive branch, but my job as a member of this branch is to decide what the law is and apply it faithfully. And without the rule of law, then all of the other principles that I might have fall apart. And so I take that incredibly seriously. And I think that this notion of providing that clarity to the other branches is really important. And to loop back to the question about law enforcement, just in the past week, I had a conversation with the Anoka County Sheriff. And I think it's very clear that what law enforcement and folks working in the other branches really want from us more than anything else is clarity and an understanding of what is the law, what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. And so I take really seriously my responsibility to write clearly and to explain our decisions in a way that everybody can understand.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini. And we'll start with you with this next question. The question is, are there types of cases you feel are especially important for an appellate or a Supreme Court to hear and resolve?
And that's to me.
Yes.
Yeah. I think every case that we have is incredibly important, and it's incredibly important to the people who appear in front of us. And so it's hard for me to pick and choose. But when I think about the Minnesota Supreme Court's role in the legal system, clearly it's really important for us to define and interpret the Minnesota Constitution, because we have the last word on what the Minnesota Constitution means. And for years and decades, the Minnesota Supreme Court has ensured that Minnesotans' rights are protected, sort of regardless and independent of whatever might be happening in the federal courts. And that has meant that over the years, the Minnesota Supreme Court has interpreted Minnesotans to have enhanced rights in certain areas. You have more privacy rights here in Minnesota than you might in other states. And this is the genius of federalism and the federal system that we have in the U.S., that different states make different decisions about their constitutions. Our Constitution has provisions that other states don't have. You have a right to hunt and fish in Minnesota, and other states don't have that right in their Constitution. So I think when we swear that oath to uphold both the U.S. and Minnesota Constitutions, our role is especially important to help Minnesotans understand what that Constitution means, because we're the last word, and that can mean the difference between somebody having their rights and not. And so that's incredibly important to me.
Thank you, candidate Procaccini. And candidate Bradfold, please.
It is hard to say that there is any one type of case that's most important for the appellate courts to hear. My court, as I've mentioned, is the one that every litigant has a chance to go to after they receive a final decision in the district court. And so one thing that my court does not do, we do not hear evidence, we don't second-guess juries, we review the case for the law. So whenever there is a question about what is the law or how it should be interpreted, those are very important cases to bring to my court. But I have to be honest with you, many of the cases we hear are cases where it's simply the last chance to do justice in that case. So for instance, cases in which parents have had their parental rights terminated, or cases in which someone has been convicted of a crime and is now serving a sentence in prison. Now, they may not have an exciting legal issue for me to look at, but it is important for my court to give that case the same amount of time that every other case receives, and that we would issue a reasoned, understandable decision in that case, because every case that comes to my court is important. It's important to the people involved in that case. And so that's my answer. I agree with Justice Procaccini that the Constitution's at the top of the list, and Minnesota has done wonderful things in terms of enhancing our Constitution and explaining it for everyone. But each and every case that comes to my court is important.
Thank you, candidate Bradfold. And candidate Hudson, please.
I would agree with my colleagues about the importance of the constitutional issues. Sometimes we have a joke on the court. It's almost malpractice for an attorney in a criminal matter in particular to not argue a state constitutional argument if you've got even a plausible one, because we have a long history here in Minnesota of granting more expansive rights under the Minnesota Constitution than the federal Constitution offers people. And so those are significant cases that we deal with, and again, particularly in the criminal arena, but the constitutionality of statutes and whatnot can come up under a number of different areas of law. But that is certainly one area. The other one that I would point out, and it was mentioned earlier in the opening remarks, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction of almost all election disputes. And by original jurisdiction, I mean they bypass the district courts, which are our trial courts, and they bypass the Court of Appeals, because typically, and they come directly to us, because if there is an election dispute, I need not tell you, in this day and age, that has to be resolved quickly, promptly, and accurately. And so those matters come to us. And there are very few issues that have more impact on the broader electorate than those election disputes. We also have original jurisdiction of first-degree murder cases, which I think most people don't understand. We don't have the death penalty here in Minnesota, and so those first-degree murder individuals who've been convicted of that have a right to come directly and have their appeals heard by us, and obviously those are of pressing concern.
Thank you, candidate Hudson. Candidate Hansen, please.
Yeah, I would have to agree with everyone else here on the panel. Obviously, the constitutional cases that affect you personally as a citizen of the state are going to be most important to you. And it's especially good when the court is unanimous on those decisions, especially when they grant and affect your rights personally. But really, you know, they're all obviously very important, especially if they get up to the Minnesota Supreme Court. So the ones that may be perceived as limiting rights for people, or more narrowly tailoring certain laws, I think those are especially important, that the written work product of the court is on point. Because that's really where a lot of the fray of typical politics of like a legislature or Congress is. You can use certain decisions, like in Minnesota recently, a self-defense case went to the Supreme Court, and that got a lot of attention in the press and things like that. But when you have well-written, even dissents in those cases, I think that's also important to help really explain why the court is doing what it's doing. And it's not an oracle type thing that they're just pulling it out of their head, but well-reasoned legal arguments are especially important for those type of cases.
Thank you, candidate Hansen. All right, and we will start with you for this next question. We kind of touched on this a little bit in a couple different answers, but I thought it would be good just to get some clarity and hear one more time from each of you. The question is, what do you think are the 2 or 3 biggest challenges for the judicial administration at the Supreme Court level, and what would you do to address them?
Yeah, one reason I'm running is to kind of shine a light on these and bring it more into the public view. Because I think the best way to solve these issues is not behind closed doors, and it's not about private discussion, but really allowing these, general topics of administration of justice and ways to improve the court right out in the open. And even, allowing the people of Minnesota to ask questions directly. And I believe that having elections like this is one way to kind of bring it to the forefront. Maybe things that might have been missed by current members of the court are getting brought to their attention when they're going out speaking to people. So really, kind of what we're doing here would help with the administration.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. Candidate Hudson, please.
I would go back to, again, I think the access issue is always key, because if everyone does not have a way to access justice, then our justice system has failed us. And so I think, again, we need to focus on the development of our remote hearing program. We need to focus on the new paraprofessional program that the Supreme Court has just implemented, which allows paralegals to provide advice under the supervision of attorneys in certain areas such as landlord-tenant law and family law and consumer matters, which again, those are areas of the law where most people often appear what we call pro se, or they're self-represented. And that allows those individuals to have some kind of advice in these key areas in their lives. I continue to believe, particularly as Chief Justice, that we need to advocate at the legislature for additional money for our court interpreters. Our society is becoming more and more diverse, and everyone has to be able to access justice. They should not be limited simply because they do not speak English. And we have to make sure that our court interpreter program is properly funded. Likewise, we have a constitutional obligation to make sure that every individual in a criminal trial is actually competent to stand trial, and that requires mental health examinations, and we need to fund that. We have both a moral obligation but also a legal obligation to do so. And so those are some of our, I think, key challenges right now in our judicial administration.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Candidate Procaccini, please.
So I'd say at a very high level, we live in a time when institutions, trusted institutions, are under attack from a lot of different areas, and I don't think the courts are immune to that. And so first and foremost, I think our judicial branch needs to continue to do the work to make sure that we have credibility with every Minnesotan, whether they agree with our decision or not. And that starts with us doing the work to listen to all sides, explain our decisions well, and be out there and talking to folks about how we do the work that we do. Because ultimately, the branch is only as strong as our integrity and reputation with the people who we work for. And part of that is also ensuring that people get a fair trial. And so some of the things that we've already talked about today, making sure that juries look like the communities in which they sit, and that we're removing barriers, whether it's distance or compensation, to make sure that the juries reflect those communities, so that people who are facing a possible deprivation of their liberty know that they're truly being judged by a jury of their peers. There are lots of challenges and opportunities. Again, I'll note that I think there are some serious challenges coming to the branch as a result of advancements in technology, but there's also a lot of opportunities from those same developments, and we need to be ready for those and ready to seize the opportunities when they come.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini. Candidate Bradfold, please.
So I agree with the issues that have been mentioned by everyone so far. There's really nothing more important than access to justice, and all of the points that the Chief Justice made and that Justice Procaccini made about Maintaining trust in our institutions are very important. Nothing's more important as well than fairness in the jury trial system. I'll just add one more thought to the list in terms of the challenges that our court faces. So I think it's integral to maintaining public confidence in the judiciary, which is that we need to guard the future of the judicial system. So in the future, of course, we'll continue to have judicial elections. In the future, we will need new individuals to step up here today to be your judges. We will need new individuals to be in our court system as clerks, as officers, police officers, as court officers. We need new lawyers to step forward. And I think the best way we can do that is to make sure there's a connection between the court system and our educational system. Now, we do that already, the appellate courts do, in many important ways. Both the Minnesota Court of Appeals and the Minnesota Supreme Court take great effort to do outreach in the school system, to provide a civics education and civics lesson in real time, so to actually argue cases in front of high school students and in front of law students. But it's engaging the youth in our task that will ultimately yield the best justice system that Minnesota could have.
Thank you, candidate Bradfold. And we will begin with you with this next question. I believe this will be the last question. Time check. Yeah. Okay. So this will be our last question this evening, a little bit different flavor than we've been talking so far. So the question is, what is one aspect of your non-legal background that has informed your approach to judicial decision-making or justice more broadly? Again, candidate Bradfold, would you begin, please?
Well, I have to say that from my non-legal background, the thing that informs me the most is, of course, my family and life experience. I am the mother of 4 adult children. I have 2 grandchildren. I have obviously had a busy career and experienced what all of that meant, and was lucky to have the support of my family in doing that. My mother and father were very important to me in all of those ways. When it comes to making my opinions readable and understandable, which I hope I'm doing, you'll have to tell me after you read a few. I think that going to college and having professors be patient with me and routinely critique my writing, as well as in later life learning how to write some poetry, has been what's really helped me more than anything in being able to express myself in a way that I hope everyone can understand. So,
thank you, candidate Bradfold. Candidate Procaccini, please.
So I think the aspect of my non-legal background that informs my thinking on the court the most is my upbringing. And so I was raised by a single mom who raised myself and my 2 siblings. She was a nurse and devoted her life to serving others, and showed me the importance of giving back to your community and serving others, because we all need, a helping hand at some point or another in our lives. And I think growing up in that environment also gave me a sense of justice, and seeing some of the injustice that occurs when you don't have all the resources to advocate for yourself or fully engage in some of the systems that our society creates. And so I think about that every day. I think about that with every party that appears in front of us, whether they're the biggest Minnesota company or an individual Minnesotan who's working hard to earn money to feed their kids, or just work their jobs and get through life. And so I think it's important for all of us as appellate judges to think about the individuals behind each case, and I try to take that with me into the courtroom every day.
Thank you, candidate Procaccini. Candidate Hansen, please.
One aspect of my non-legal background that really, helped encourage me and to even go to law school was my family. They certainly have always been there. My dad is in the audience tonight. He himself was an attorney for a very long time and a professor. And also working jobs that most people would scoff at. Working in fast food, you deal with all types of people. And you'd think when people are getting ice cream, they'd normally be happy, but sometimes they're not so happy. So really just no matter what kind of attitude or energy comes your way, is really responding in what you can control and just being positive and helpful. And working jobs like, overnight factory in Cambria, you learn that not necessarily a desirable career, but the type of people that are working those jobs or carpentry, they may not be, as educated as us members up here at the panel, but there is a lot of wisdom to people who do the jobs that some of us may scoff at. And that kind of background that I have, and I still carry with me, makes me very appreciative of working for and with those types of people.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. Candidate Hudson, please.
I would have to say that the part of my background that influences me most, obviously, is my family. My parents were both educators, were both teachers. My father was a football coach for many, many years, and coached at a time when, unfortunately, racism was quite prevalent. And I remember watching how he kept his football team together, the white players and the black players, and made sure that they watched out for one another, and regardless of the racial issues. And I learned from my dad perseverance, compassion, and that's how you treat other people. But also, my family has been one of service. Marion Wright Edelman once said that service is the rent we pay for living, and I think we all have an obligation to engage in some type of service that goes beyond ourselves, and I believe that very strongly. And even in my immediate family, my husband, who's here, is a former police officer with the St. Paul Police Department for many, many years, and was also a pastor for many, many years. And my son is also an attorney and is mostly worked in the public sector. And so service is something that runs deep for us. And I think it's the perseverance. I recognize my role as the first person of color to serve as Chief Justice. Representation matters, and I recognize that my position here is important, not only for little black girls and boys, but for white black boys and girls, to normalize people of color in positions of authority. And so that background has fueled me over the course of my career.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Now it's time for closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to conclude, and we'll begin with Candidate Procaccini.
All right, thank you. I'm honored and humbled to have the job that I do, and it's an honor to get to serve the people of Minnesota in this way. I encourage the folks in this room and the folks watching online to research the candidates in the race and learn about our experience. I think that my experience on the court and my experience before appointment make me qualified for this job and a strong Supreme Court justice. I've had a broad range of legal experience, from my work in private practice as a partner in a law firm, to my work in government, to my work teaching the next generation of lawyers. And I take this job really seriously, and I think that that's important for the people of Minnesota. I work hard to uphold my commitment to Minnesotans every day, and most fundamentally, I want to make sure that our courts do right by everybody. I'm really grateful to the League for hosting this forum, the Minnesota State Bar Association for hosting the forum. I'm grateful to the folks who support my campaign, and I'd ask everybody to please turn over your ballot and vote for me by November 5th.
Thank you, Candidate Procaccini. Candidate Bratfold, please.
I'm going to offer 3 reasons for you to vote to keep me at the Minnesota Court of Appeals. The first reason is my experience. I have the experience to handle the high volume of cases at the Minnesota Court of Appeals. In fact, I've already written, and those opinions are out there for you to read, over 400 opinions on behalf of the Court of Appeals. I've sat on and decided with other judges over 1,200 appeals. Now, that greatly informs me and helps me do justice in each and every one of those cases, as well as the future cases that will come to the court. I have a lot of legal experience guiding me as well, because I practiced law for over 26 years before I went to the district court bench and learned to respect the jury process. The second reason I'd offer to you is that I've earned the respect of lawyers and judges throughout the state. I'm very fortunate in the poll that was done by the Bar Association to have won the vote of confidence of lawyers. And then the last reason I would suggest is that I am committed to a fair and impartial system of justice. And those are the things you need on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Thank you for hearing us tonight.
Thank you, Candidate Bradfold. Candidate Hudson, please.
I'm asking for your vote to remain as Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, but also to remain as an associate, obviously, on the Minnesota Supreme Court. And I'm asking for that vote for three basic reasons. One is my extensive experience. I've practiced law for over 40 years, and I've practiced in almost every area of law that there is. You need that kind of breadth of practice, given that the Supreme Court hears every kind of case imaginable. I've done work at legal services, serving the poor, doing landlord-tenant law. I've worked in private practice, doing employment law. I worked for 8 years at the Minnesota Attorney General's office doing criminal appellate law, so I argued appellate cases before the courts that I now sit on. And so I am honored to be the chief, and I would just say that being the chief, as I said before, is an administrative position, and I have the experience now, having been the chief for a year, and I would bring that experience, continue to bring that experience to this position. And so I ask for your vote on November 5th.
Thank you, Candidate Hudson. Candidate Hansen, please.
I just want to start off by thanking all of you for joining us here tonight. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Minnesota State Bar Association for hosting this event. Allowing the people of Minnesota to ask questions directly to judicial candidates helps build confidence in the judiciary. It also provides voters with an opportunity to make an informed choice this November. I ask for your vote not just as a vote for me personally, but as a vote for an independent judiciary and to mark the beginning of a new chapter in Minnesota where the people elect their judges to maintain a truly independent judiciary. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Hansen. That concludes our candidate forum this evening. Please join me in thanking the candidates for participating in this forum with a round of applause. We'll now hear from Golden Valley Voter Service Chair Jackie Wells while the candidates for 4th Judicial District Judge are being seated.
Thank you so much to the candidates for Minnesota Supreme Court and Court of Appeals for participating in our candidate forum and addressing voters' questions. While they leave the stage, I'll give a brief overview of the 4th Judicial District Court, which is the second segment of our forum this evening. The 4th Judicial District Court includes only Hennepin County and is the state's largest trial court with 63 judges, 12 referees, and more than 500 staff. So we do have another segment of the forum. I just want to make sure you know. Sorry. The 4th Judicial District Court includes only Hennepin County and is the state's largest trial court with 63 judges, 12 referees, and more than 500 staff who process more than 40% of all cases filed in the state of Minnesota. It includes civil court, criminal court, treatment courts, family court, juvenile court, probate court, mental health court, and veterans court. Our moderator, Deb Brinkman, will be resuming our forum now. And I ask the audience to please quiet down. Thank you. Thank you. Deb Brinkman, please.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our candidate forum for the contested judicial seat for 4th Judicial District Court Judge 24. Both candidates were invited, but one of the candidates did not respond to the league's emails and certified mail. We welcome Matthew Frank to the forum. This part of the forum has the same rules and processes as the preceding forum. The opening question is, why are you running for office and what are your qualifications? You will have up to 2 minutes to respond.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the League and the State Bar Association It is a pleasure to be here. This is a very important function, as others have already said. Voters should be as educated about candidates as they can be, and that includes the judicial races as well. I am running to retain the seat that I was appointed to in 2023 because I do think that I am a good public servant. I think I am a good judge, and I think I have the experience and the personal life experience to continue to be a good judge and to improve as a judge. I started out after law school working for Judge Oleski here in Hennepin County. When I first got to see how he, acted as a judge, how he treated people, and how he used the law to, affect people's lives every day. And I thought that was something that I would use as a goal for my career. Since then, I did work for 3 years in private practice. I learned how law firms operate. I learned civil law. But I knew I wanted to go back to public sector work and serve the public, so I served as a public defender for 3 years. I worked as a misdemeanor prosecutor in Wright County for a year, and then went to the Attorney General's office and worked there for about 23 years, mostly in the criminal division, and ultimately became the manager of the criminal division and oversaw attorneys doing appellate work, attorneys doing trial work, and I myself tried cases all over the state of Minnesota. I have been in courtrooms all over the state of Minnesota hundreds and hundreds of times. That gives me good personal experience, good legal experience to continue to do the job that I started last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Frank. And now we will proceed to questions that we've received from the audience or from the League of Women Voters email account. Each response will be 1.5 minutes long. And the first question is, what approach do you take in preparing to hear a case?
Well, I think it's very important, and I do this every day, to remind myself what my job is. My job is to try and resolve a dispute between two parties coming to me, and to do so by applying the law without favor, without bias, or without prejudice. To check myself every day when I go to work, that's the first step. Because that's what the job is, right? Is applying the rule of law fairly and impartially. Then I also check my patience because we have a large volume in the district court, but justice means being heard. And so everybody should have a chance to be heard. They may not like the decision, but if they feel like they've been heard, that's some sense possibly of justice for them. Obviously, I'm a student, I shouldn't say obviously, I am a student of the law. I love the law, so I keep up on the law, and I am part of helping train other judges. I'm serving on committees that help create educational opportunities for judges. And of course, I like to be prepared. I don't want to go into court knowing absolutely nothing about what's hitting me that day. So I try to read the case, familiarize myself with each case so that I have an understanding of what's coming and then prepare to go in and listen to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Frank. And our next question is, how do you manage a caseload and prioritize cases?
Very patiently. I'm currently handling a property, drug, felony, criminal caseload, and my caseload can vary from 300 to 400 cases at any given time. And that's, meaning I spend a lot of time in the courtroom. I'm in the courtroom almost every day, most weeks for the entire day. But it has to be managed fairly, and it has to be managed in a way that people feel like they weren't just, shown the door. And so preparation's key, and I work very hard to be prepared. And knowing that I'm going to be in court all day, and that's going to be my job to make decisions every day, to listen to people fully, and make those decisions professionally, but also while being patient and of a calm temperament to hear people. But it also means, and this was really helpful, I didn't really think about this before I went on the bench, being a manager of a large group in a law firm helps you understand a little bit about managing caseloads and controlling resources, and that's been very helpful too, to help structure my time with my staff. I have 2 great law clerks that are of considerable help in managing our caseload, so they deserve a lot of credit too. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Frank. And our next question is, what are your thoughts on alternative dispute resolution methods such as mediation or arbitration?
Alternative dispute resolution is clearly critical to our success, I think, as a judicial branch. You know, our job, our function in your government is to resolve disputes between parties, you know, whether that's criminal or civil. And alternative dispute resolution is critical to handling that. Oftentimes, judges make decisions that are one way or another. We're sort of a binary, you win or you don't win. And sometimes disputes are better handled in an alternative dispute resolution mechanism like mediation or arbitration, where there's more give and take, more understanding. I think practicing lawyers know when lawyers come together in a room and have to talk about their case, things have a tendency to work out a little better than if they've never faced each other and talked about their respective cases. So alternative dispute resolution can be very helpful. It can be very cost effective for parties as well, because the judicial system can move slower, can be bulky, and can be expensive for litigants. And so a dispute resolution mechanism that can shorten that time frame is certainly economically beneficial as well. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Frank. Our next question is, how do you think our legal system can be improved to make it more accessible for lower income and self-represented people?
It's really interesting that we have gone to a much more remote-based system. Certainly COVID expedited that process, but it was probably going that way anyway. The plain fact of the matter is a large number of hearings that can be handled remotely on Zoom. And that saves so much. And I recognize, as much as I don't like having people on Zoom when I'm having a hearing, it can save people a considerable amount of time and money. Because let's face it, it's very difficult for people to, drive downtown, try and find parking, pay for parking, take time off work for a hearing that you don't know how long you're going to be there for. If you have kids that have to be picked up from school, that can be very difficult for people. If you're in a larger county, think about driving 35 miles to the courthouse. Pine County I've been to court there a lot, and how massive is Pine County, or even St. Louis County? Imagine having to drive an hour just to go to a court hearing that may only last 5 to 10 minutes. Remote hearings are very, I think, beneficial in many ways. We do that a lot for people who are in treatment. Why take them out of treatment for a day even just to go to court? So that's a huge part of it, which has a lot of promise for making things very much better for people. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Frank. Our next question is, many people believe that our criminal justice system does not provide equal justice for all. What is your perspective? What should you and the court do, if anything, to address the concern about a lack of justice?
Yeah, this is a very important issue because we are such a pluralistic society. We have such diversity, particularly here in Minnesota, that we need to, as has been mentioned earlier, make sure that we are providing diverse juries, not just in terms of race or gender, but also economic backgrounds. It's very important, when I'm talking to jurors and they're getting paid $20 to leave work for an entire day, That's very difficult for people to do. That's going to be very critical. One of the things that the branch did a couple of years ago is develop a jury instruction about bias. And I think one of the great things about that jury instruction, we read a lot of law to jurors, and this tells them, think about your biases. We all have them, it's okay. But think about them when you're making a decision. And we have this list of factors that, to take into account. It's really great. That's going to be very important to make sure that our juries are diverse and that we are aware of biases in the system. And of course, there is an access question about courthouses and time. And so those are, I think, some of the big factors.
Thank you, candidate Frank. Our next question is, how can the courts reduce the crime wave by youth of stolen cars?
Yeah, this is obviously a very important topic. And, crime, there are many and varied reasons for crime. And we, as the judicial branch, try to address what are the behaviors driving that crime, so that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Juvenile crime is complicated. We all were children. We all, as children, made decisions that were probably not well thought out, and yet there are also juvenile crime that has become very serious, and so we need to, as a branch, be very thoughtful and conscientious about how we are going to address these very important issues. And juvenile crime is one that is particularly challenging because they are juveniles, they are children still, and there is a family part of every juvenile story that we can't ignore. So it's going to be a mix of solutions, quite frankly. And one thing that I try to do every day, again, is think individual cases. These are individual people, not everybody is the same. And so you have to be conscientious, thoughtful, and resourceful about how you resolve cases, and that is very true right now for juvenile crime.
Thank you, candidate Frank. And I believe this will be our last question. Time check, is that? Yep, okay. All right, thank you for that. The last question we have is, was there anything about your work as a district court judge that you did not expect or that surprised you when you first came to the bench?
Well, I remember the first time that I was there, and I was judging. There was a judge supervising me, which is how we do it. And the parties introduced themselves, and I just sat there, and somebody said, "You go now." And I thought, oh yeah, I know what I was talking about. That was a surprising day. I didn't expect that. But it's been a tremendous job. I love this job. It has been hard to step back from an advocate's job, because I was an advocate, as a trial attorney for my entire career. And so it was really hard to step back out of that role. That's what really surprised me, is how difficult that was going to be to give up. That's why, every day when I go in, I think about that. You're not a prosecutor anymore. Your personal feelings don't matter. And to make the right decisions without bias or prejudice or fear. And so that was really surprising. That adjustment, I will be candid, was really surprising. But I think knowing about that is the key to overcoming that and to checking that at the door, so to speak. So that has been the serious answer to your question.
Thank you, candidate Frank. Now it's time for candidate Frank's 1-minute closing statement.
Well, again, I thank everybody for being here. It's interesting to run for election when you've just been a practicing lawyer all your career, but this is absolutely critical to have an educated electorate, to make a decision. And I used to tell people all the time, think about it as a job interview. And I'm here because I want to tell you that I have the real life experience I am right around 60. I've lived a full life, and I've gained a lot of experience as a person, and understanding that not everybody is the same, and everybody that comes before me should not be judged on their character. They should be judged individually. And so that's been very important to who I am and how I approach the job, but also my 30 years of legal experience, 34 years of legal experience, and the fact that I still remain intellectually curious about the law and love this job and public service. So I respectfully request that you all vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Frank. Please join me in thanking Candidate Frank for participating in this forum with a round of applause. Now we will hear from Golden Valley Voter Service Chair Jackie Wells.
Thank you so much to both of you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Golden Valley and Minnesota State Bar Association, I thank the candidates for the contested seats on the Minnesota Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and 4th Judicial District Court for being part of our democratic process by running for office, for being willing to serve our community, and for answering voters' questions tonight. These candidates are on the other side of your election ballot. A special thank you to Deb Brinkman of League of Women Voters of St. Louis Park for moderating. Thank you also to our League of Women Voters volunteers, our audience here in person, and those viewing this event virtually for participating in this forum. We hope and we know the forum has helped voters to learn an awful lot to make their decisions. Many thanks to CCX Media for recording this forum. They are always great partners to our local leagues. This forum will be replayed on CCX channels, available online at ccxmedia.org. The recording will also be linked on League of Women Voters Facebook pages at vote411.org and on the MSBA website. For additional election information, we encourage you to visit vote411.org. The League of Women Voters nonpartisan award-winning one-stop shop where voters can register to vote, find their polling place, and learn how candidates stand on the issues. The League researches issues important to our members and the health of our communities. If you're interested in learning more about what we do and how you also can make a difference, please pick up a membership brochure or visit us at lwvmn.org. League membership is open to anyone age 16 or over. Early voting begins September 20th at your City Hall during regular business hours through November 4th, plus until 7 p.m. on October 29, and on both Saturday, November 2, and Sunday, November 3, the Sunday is new this year, from 9 to 3. You may also request an absentee ballot be mailed to you, and you'd want to do that soon. Early voter registration ends on October 15th, but voters may also register to vote when applying for an absentee ballot, when early voting, and of course on Election Day. We heard about the Minnesota Constitution tonight, and on the November ballot, Minnesota voters will be asked to reauthorize or end a constitutional amendment allocating 40% of state lottery proceeds to the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Over 50% of voters must vote yes to improve constitutional protection of the system. Leaving the question blank is a no vote. Please look for the amendment and make your decision and vote. The general election is on November 5th. Your vote is your voice. Thank you all so much.